That's so rough too. I mean, so far this comic book has been like a series of like incomplete sneezes or something, right?
Yeah.
It's like it starts out like quintessential Batman, like these beautiful shots of these aerial acrobatics and stuff, and then it ends with like him calling the police, or in this case,
Hmm.
so far everyone else has just been like, "Oh, Batman's here," whatever. This
Hmm.
case, they were like angry that Batman was there, that
Yeah.
they blew his undercover operation had been working on for a long time. It's like, ah, geez, this guy is
Yeah.
super
Yeah. Yeah.
upset about it. Like, it's pretty funny.
Yeah. No, it's like definitionally comedy, right? It is.
Yeah,
They do the setup, the wind up for the joke, right? And then the punchline's not what you'd expect, right?
right.
And so, yeah, we're 8 pages in. I think it's like a 14-page story. You get the gist, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
going to be more of this.
But it's also like there's a point while you're reading through it where you're like, how many different ways can you misread a situation?
Hmm.
You know, it's like I know as I read through, it was like I figured at some point he was gonna solve a crime or like or stop a
Well, that's
crime.
what you
Like
expect, right?
every
That's
single
Batman.
situation, I was like, okay, this time it'll be real. You know, he'll get the payoff.
Well, let's see. 2:16 a.m. Batman's sitting on a park bench and he's thinking to himself, nice night, quiet night, park's quiet, river's quiet, quiet night, which I think is just a really fun monologue to himself.
Mhm.
And then he hears something and he turns around suddenly. So there's people behind him, behind the park bench. And there's a lone young woman who's walking hurriedly through the park. And three young men are kind of chasing after her. And Batman looks really concerned. And he thinks to himself, here's a lesson you won't forget, you little rat packers. And he starts chasing after them, right? Because these guys are up to no good. They're going to jump this girl, right?
Well, he also thinks to himself at the beginning of this. He goes, "Okay, this one I can't figure wrong. Like
Right.
this one I can't miss this one. This is definitely what's going on here."
Right. Can't not act. This is important.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not going to mess this one up. Then the boys catch up to the girl, and one of the boys says, Charlene, I apologize. I didn't mean to get you sore, but you shouldn't be in the park alone. Come on, we'll walk you to the subway. We got to get home too. And she says, I didn't mean to yell at you, Rick, but wasn't it a great concert? So we get the vibe that these are all friends,
Yeah.
and they just want to make sure that she's not walking through the park alone. And Batman kind of stops and he's like hiding behind a tree and watching them walk away. Again, there's this really disappointed and like frustrated look on his face. Like he's like,
Hmm.
like, what am I doing wrong here? Then we cut to a different scene. It's 2:38 a.m. and Batman spots a man with a crowbar trying to jimmy open the door of a car. Like he's like shoving it down. Have you ever seen people do this before? I don't think I've
Yep.
ever seen it with a crowbar before. But
I've never seen it with a crowbar, but I've seen it with like coat hangers or like there are other things that you can slip down. You're trying to catch the lock for the door that's inside the door that's usually like right below where the window rolls up and down. So slipping down, finding that spot, yanking up on it, it opens the door.
So Batman walks up behind the guy and says, this is too much car for you, fella. I think a paddy wagon's more your speed. And just then, as he says this, we see a woman with a wire hanger from the other side of the car. And she goes,
Bernie, honey, it worked on this side, and this is the last time I let you lock the doors in the car. Uh-oh. Ah, good evening, Batman.
and so, and so Batman just walks away from the car. He throws up his head in there and he goes, justice? Don't talk to me about justice. There's no justice in the universe.
It's super funny too, because like the way the text like gets smaller and smaller is like his voice trailing off, like justice. Don't talk to me about justice. There's no justice in the universe. Like,
And up until now, he's like mostly been internal monologue. Like he's thinking to himself
yeah.
all these things. This time he's saying it.
Mhm.
It's like snapping at this lady who just got into her own car. 3:19 a.m. Batman spots someone with a ladder just outside of a jewelry store. They're at the top of the ladder. They're making noises, working on something on the side of the building. And Batman runs up behind, assuming they're disabling the alarm system. And he goes, a little late for jewelry shopping, isn't it? And we see it's a woman wearing a security system company jumpsuit. Like she's works for the company. She goes, oh, thank goodness. I'm glad you showed up, Batman. I can use an extra pair of hands. And she hands him a flashlight to hold while she works. And Batman has like the most awkward look on his face. He's got like a forced smile. He goes, I could tell you had an emergency here, lady.
Oh man. It also is like really pushing him down the pegs. He is a child with his dad telling him to like point it here. Cause she
You
literally
did,
does say in this, like in the bottom corner here, she's like, "You're not holding it right. Hold the light steady." Just like every dad does to their kid.
yeah, you definitely get the sense that he feels it's an indignity that he's been
Yeah.
downgraded from fighting crime to like helping random people on the street.
Yeah.
3:54 a.m. We cut to a different scene. We see a big, mean looking bald guy, like stereotypical, evil guy. He's got like a mean smile on his face. We're looking up at him from below, and we think maybe he's smoking a cigar. They make it out to
Yeah.
be that, but it turns out in a subsequent panel that he's eating a candy bar.
And then Batman thinks, "My God, it's a golem with a candy bar. What a brute! Gotta be a night stalking strangler."
And the guy throws the candy wrapper over his shoulder. And then Batman goes, "There's an ordinance against littering, Tiny."
Which is like a pretty normal like setup for the bad guy to like turn and throw some other quip, and then they start fighting or something.
Sure. It's also like very Batman 66 of like, I guess
Yeah.
you haven't watched much of that or any of that, question mark?
Nope.
None of
Any
that.
of
Okay.
it.
There's a lot of like him explaining to Robin why like they need to look both ways before they cross the street and use crosswalks and like,
So it's like teaching children how to be safe and stuff.
yeah, it's very Boy Scouts like,
Yeah.
And so like there's a city ordinance against littering, Batman's been reduced to calling people out for throwing their trash. And the guy's kind of sheepish. He's like, "Litter? Huh? Oh man, you're absolutely right. I should be ashamed of myself. I'm always complaining about how people turn our streets into garbage pits. Good citizens ever need reinforcing. Thank goodness you're always with us, Batman. Good night, sir, and have a quiet evening." And he goes, he picks up the trash and he puts it in the, puts it in a bin, and he waves as he's smiling and walking away.
It's also like a super funny response to be like, "Oh, litter. Oh, you're absolutely right. I'm in the wrong." It's like,
Yeah, what was I thinking?
Getting pulled over and being like, "You're right, officer. I was speeding. Thank you for pulling me over." Right. And then also like a slap in the face for after the night that he's had, for him to say like, "I hope you have a quiet evening." It's like, I have a quiet evening.
Yeah, Batman's in the foreground. He's just got his arms crossed, doesn't say a word, right? And then finally, 4:16 a.m., we cut to Wayne Manor, and Alfred comes into the study with a kettle of tea, and he says, "Oh, Master Bruce, I didn't realize you returned from your patrol. Ended early. Was it a trying evening filled with the usual danger?"
And he says, "Worst night of my life, Alfred. Absolutely, without a doubt, the most miserable night of my life."
And that's the end. I will say one thing that I didn't include in my summary is that there periodically throughout this book, there are quotations and caption boxes that are not really about the story. They're just kind of adding color from Confucius and Sun Tzu and some other authors I've not heard of, Eric Hoffer, Leslie Tomner. And it's very, it wouldn't translate if I tried to include it in the summary, but it totally adds color to the way that Batman's feeling, the sort of like the themes that are being played with. Like, for example, one of the quotes is, "If a man seeks to know thoroughly the past, the present, and the future, he should understand that the realm of existence is but a creation of the mind." And it's like, what does that have to do with the story? Not much. But this is absolutely one that you can read over and over and over again and appreciate other different things, small little things, different ways to view the situation. For something that is such a simple story, fundamentally, there's a lot of depth that I think is lost probably in our summarization. So I definitely encourage you to go find this and read it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about it?
About the comic overall?
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, it's super funny. Yeah, I like the comedy aspect of this kind of stuff, especially like what we were saying. It's like bait and switch over and over again. And oh man, I don't know if this will translate well, but there's this Kristen Shaw, I think is who it is, does this thing where she basically bounces around like a horse. And on the stage, and this guy is singing like, "Kristen Shaw's a horse, Kristen Shaw's a horse, look at her run, look at her go, look at her run like a horse," and it just does it over and over and over again, but like for like 15 minutes.
Sure.
And it's one of these things where like it's you expect it to finish at some point. You expect it to end, but like the longer it goes, like it goes into like this awkward phase, and then it comes back into this hilarious phase. Like they're still going, and it just keeps the part of the humor is that it actually never really resolves, and that is the humor that I catch in this. That like he never ever got the sneeze in, right? He just like built up, and like he just strike after strike after strike. He missed out and went home. And that's like, I think that's super funny to like from my perspective. It's very, very funny to me.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about repetition. Like there's the song that never ends, right? Which they used to do on the Lamb Chop show on PBS, where it's just annoying and it's not adding to anything and it doesn't change. And like, yeah, maybe it's funny because it doesn't end, right? But in music, there's this concept called an ostinato, which is a rhythm that's repeated over and over and over and over again, or a phrase that's repeated over and over and over again. Usually as sort of the background for something else. Like maybe you would have a tuba that's doing an ostinato, and then like there's a melody over the top of it or whatever. But sometimes I've played in bands and orchestras and things where the entire group is sort of doing the ostinato, and even though it's the same thing, it goes places. There's changes in volume and dynamic. There's changes in speed. There's changes, and it feels like you're able to convey emotion without even changing anything. And I think this does that, right, to an extent of like, yeah, it's the same. It's just scene after scene after scene of Batman's not needed, or Batman's expectations of how this is going to happen are subverted. And I think it's funny. You're right, but it also challenges the concept of Batman. I think so many of the deconstructions that are most famous of superheroes, like The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, right, try to sort of think about heroes in a real world sense of like, oh, well, they'd have to be crazy, right? Or they'd have to be, like all forms of power co-opted by the government, or they'd have to, there'd be some sort of like fundamental flaw that would be, broad in scope. And I think this kind of does a deconstruction in a very clever way where they're not really changing, some sort of fundamental premise or behavior of Batman. They're just saying like, well, what if he wasn't needed? Right? What if you actually took all of the sort of crimes and things that happened, or, goings-ons in a city that doesn't sleep, in a given night, and, there were people who helped themselves, or there were people who may appear to be in distress but are not, or places like the man who's jumping off the roof where the police infrastructure does work the way it's supposed to, right? How does Batman live in a world that's like that? And that's super interesting.